The October wind cut through downtown Millbrook like a blade, carrying the scent of dying leaves and winter's promise. Jake Thompson pulled his worn jacket tighter as he stood at the corner of Oak and Fifth, watching the yellow school bus lumber toward the stop. His hands, still stained with motor oil from another 12-hour shift at Patterson's Auto, ached in the cold. 3:47 p.m. Same time every day. The bus wheezed to a halt, its doors creaking open like tired bones. Kids poured out in their usual chaos of backpacks and laughter. Jake's eyes found his daughter immediately, Emma, 10 years old with blonde pigtails and a gap-toothed grin that could light up the darkest day. "Dad!" She launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him backward. The familiar scent of crayon wax and strawberry lip balm filled his nose. "Hey there, sunshine." He hugged her tight, feeling the day's tension melt away. This moment, this was what kept him going through the sleepless nights and endless spills. But today, something was different. As Emma pulled back, her smile faded. She glanced over her shoulder at the bus, where a small figure still sat in the third row. A girl with tangled brown hair and a gray hoodie 3 sizes too big. Even from this distance, Jake could see her shoulders shaking. "She's crying again," Emma whispered. Jake followed her gaze. The girl, he'd noticed her before, always alone, always silent, pressed her face against the window. Tears streaked down her cheeks like rain on glass. "What's her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. She never talks to anyone." The bus driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, climbed down and approached the girl. "Come on, honey. Time to get off." Sarah stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone walking on broken glass. She stepped down, clutching a worn backpack to her chest like armor. For just a moment, her eyes met Jake's. What he saw there made his stomach clench. He'd seen that look before, in his own reflection, 25 years ago. The hollow stare of a child carrying secrets too heavy for small shoulders. Sarah turned and walked away, her steps quick and panicked. She glanced back once, then disappeared around the corner toward Elm Street. "She lives with her stepdad," Emma said quietly. "Her mom died in a car crash last year." Jake's throat tightened. He knew what it was like to lose a parent. But he also knew what it was like to live with someone who wasn't supposed to hurt you but did anyway. "Come on," he said, taking Emma's hand. "Let's go home." That night, after Emma had finished her homework and gone to bed, Jake sat at his kitchen table staring at the phone. His fingers drummed against the scratched wood surface, a nervous habit he'd never been able to shake. He should call someone. A teacher. Social services. But he learned long ago that the system didn't always protect the people who needed protecting most. His own childhood flashed through his mind like broken film strips. The sound of his father's belt. His mother's excuses. The teachers who saw the bruises but never asked questions. The relatives who turned away when things got uncomfortable. He'd sworn that when he escaped, when he finally turned 18 and could leave, he'd never ignore a child in trouble again. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. "Hello. Jake? It's Linda Harrison, Emma's teacher." Jake straightened. Teachers didn't usually call at 9 p.m. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to ask you about something. Emma mentioned that you've been noticing Sarah Mitchell. The girl who rides her bus." "Yeah. She seems upset most days." A pause. "Sarah wasn't in school today. Or yesterday. No call from her guardian. I tried the emergency number, but it's disconnected." Jake's grip tightened on the phone. "What's her home situation like?" "Complicated. She lives with her stepfather, Rick Mitchell. Her mother died about 10 months ago. Since then, Sarah's changed. She used to be talkative, bright. Now she barely speaks. She's missed more school this semester than she attended." "Have you contacted child services?" "I've tried, but without clear evidence of abuse." Linda's voice trailed off. "Look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm worried. Really worried. And Emma said you seem concerned too." Jake stared out his kitchen window at the darkness beyond. "What can I do?" Maybe just keep an eye out? You see her every day at the bus stop. If something seems wrong, I will. After they hung up, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood in Emma's doorway, watching her peaceful face in the glow of her nightlight. She was safe, loved, protected. But somewhere across town, another child might be lying awake in fear. The next afternoon, Jake arrived at the bus stop 15 minutes early. He pretended to check his phone while scanning the street. At 3:45, he spotted movement near the pharmacy across the road. Sarah stood outside the glass doors, her hands pressed against the window. Even from a distance, Jake could see her distress. She kept looking over her shoulder, then back at the store. The school bus arrived right on schedule. Emma got off, chattering about a science project, but her voice faded when she noticed her father's expression. "What's wrong, Dad? Stay right here for a minute, okay?" Jake crossed the street, his heart pounding. As he got closer, he could see Sarah more clearly. Her face was pale, almost gray. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her hands shook as she reached for the pharmacy door. "Sarah." She spun around, terror flashing across her face. I'm sorry. I wasn't doing anything wrong." "Hey, it's okay." Jake held up his hands, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm Emma's dad. Remember?" From the bus stop, recognition dawned in her eyes, followed by something that might have been relief. "You don't look so good," Jake said carefully. "Are you feeling sick?" Sarah's lower lip trembled. She glanced back at the pharmacy window, where pregnancy tests were displayed prominently. Jake's blood turned to ice. "How old are you, Sarah?" 12. The word came out as barely a whisper. 12. A child. A baby herself. "When did you last eat?" She shrugged, but the gesture was weak. Jake could see her swaying slightly on her feet. "There's a diner around the corner. Why don't we get you something to eat and you can call your stepdad from there?" Sarah's reaction was immediate and visceral. She shook her head violently, backing away. "No, I can't. He'll be angry if I'm not home soon." "Sarah." Jake knelt down so they were at eye level. "Are you safe at home?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. A black pickup truck turned the corner, moving slowly down the street. Sarah saw it and went completely rigid. "I have to go," she whispered, but she didn't move. She stood frozen like a deer in headlights. The truck pulled up to the curb. A tall man with graying hair and cold eyes stepped out. Rick Mitchell looked like the kind of man who commanded attention. Broad shoulders, expensive jacket, the bearing of someone used to getting his way. His gaze swept from Sarah to Jake, and his expression hardened. "Sarah, get in the truck." She obeyed immediately, her movements robotic. As she climbed into the passenger seat, Jake caught sight of her wrist, finger-shaped bruises, dark against her pale skin. Rick's eyes met Jake's. "Problem here. Just making sure she was okay. She seemed sick." "She's fine. Mind your own business." The words carried a clear threat. Rick got into the truck and drove away, but not before Jake memorized the license plate number. Emma appeared at his side, having crossed the street despite his instructions to stay put. "Dad? What's happening?" Jake put his arm around his daughter, pulling her close. "Come on. We need to make some phone calls." That evening, Jake's small living room felt like a war room. Linda Harrison sat on his couch, her face grim. Detective Maria Santos from the Millbrook Police Department occupied the armchair, her notebook open on her lap. "The bruises on her wrist?" Detective Santos asked. "You're certain they were finger marks?" "Absolutely. And she was looking at pregnancy tests?" Jake nodded, his stomach churning at the implications. Linda spoke up. "I should have pushed harder months ago. The signs were all there. Missed school, changed behavior, apparent malnutrition. But the system..." She shook her head in frustration. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Detective Santos closed her notebook. "I'll request a wellness check tomorrow. But I need you to understand, these cases are complicated. If Sarah denies any abuse, if there's no physical evidence, She's 12 years old and possibly pregnant, Jake said, his voice harder than he intended. How much more evidence do you need? I'm on your side here, Mr. Thompson. But we have to follow protocol. After they left, Jake sat alone in his kitchen, staring at Emma's artwork covering the refrigerator. Bright, happy drawings of stick figure families and rainbow houses. The innocence he'd fought so hard to preserve for his daughter. His phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Stop interfering or you'll regret it. Jake stared at the screen, his hands clenching into fists. 25 years melted away, and suddenly he was 8 years old again, cowering in a closet while his father raged outside. But he wasn't 8 anymore. And he wouldn't let fear win. He forwarded the message to Detective Santos, then sat down to wait for morning. The wellness check was scheduled for 10 a.m. Jake called in sick to work and positioned himself at the coffee shop across from Sarah's street, where he could see the Mitchell house, a modest 2-story with peeling paint and a dead garden. At 9:55, Detective Santos and a social worker arrived. Jake watched them approach the front door, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Rick Mitchell answered the door in his bathrobe, his demeanor instantly hostile. Jake was too far away to hear the conversation, but he could read body language. Rick was angry, defensive. He kept gesturing dismissively and shaking his head. After 10 minutes, the officials left empty-handed. Jake's phone rang. She wasn't there, Detective Santos said without preamble. Mitchell claims she's visiting relatives in another state. Says she left yesterday. That's impossible. I saw her yesterday afternoon. I know. But without a warrant, we can't search the house. And Mitchell produced a text message supposedly from Sarah, saying she's safe. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. You don't believe him. What I believe doesn't matter. What I can prove does. That afternoon, Jake picked up Emma from school early. As they drove home, she was unusually quiet. Dad? Is Sarah in trouble? Jake glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. How much could he tell her without destroying her innocence? Some adults hurt children, and when that happens, other adults have to step in and help. Is someone hurting Sarah? I think so. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, are you going to help her? Jake met her eyes in the mirror. Yes. Good. She looks scared all the time. Like she's waiting for something bad to happen. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He walked through his house, checking locks, pulling curtains closed. The threatening text message had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. At 2 a.m., he stood in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep. She clutched her stuffed elephant, her face peaceful in the dim glow of her nightlight. What if helping Sarah put Emma in danger? The thought made him physically sick. Emma was everything to him, his purpose, his joy, his reason for getting up every morning. When Emma's mother walked out 3 years ago, Jake had sworn he'd never let anyone hurt his daughter again. But somewhere in the darkness, a 12-year-old girl needed help. And he was possibly the only person who'd noticed. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Last warning. Jake stared at the message, then deleted it. He checked the locks one more time and went to bed. But he didn't sleep. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Linda Harrison called before Jake left for work. I need to tell you something, she said. Rick Mitchell filed a complaint against you with the school district. He's claiming you're stalking his stepdaughter. Jake's stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means you need to be careful. Very careful. If he escalates this to the police. I haven't done anything wrong. I know that. But appearances matter. And right now, it looks like a single father is taking an unusual interest in a 12-year-old girl. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. His reputation, his job, Emma's safety, everything could be at risk. What should I do? Back off. Let the authorities handle it. But the authorities weren't handling it. Sarah had been missing for 3 days, and no one seemed to care except him. That afternoon, Jake stood in his usual spot at the bus stop, feeling exposed and paranoid. Every car that passed seemed to slow down. Every stranger who glanced his way might be watching him. Emma got off the bus with her usual enthusiasm, but her smile faded when she saw his expression. "Dad? You look sick." "I'm fine, sweetheart." But he wasn't fine. As they walked home, Jake noticed the black pickup truck parked 2 blocks away. Rick Mitchell sat behind the wheel, watching them. That evening, Jake made a decision that would change everything. After Emma went to bed, he drove to the Mitchell house. He parked down the street and waited, watching the windows for any sign of movement. At 11 p.m., a light came on in an upstairs bedroom. A shadow passed by the window, small, child-sized. Sarah was there. Jake called Detective Santos, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried the main police number. "Millbrook Police, Officer Williams speaking. I need to report a missing child who's been found." "Sir, if the child has been found, they're not missing. She's been reported as visiting relatives, but she's actually being held at her home. I can see her right now. Are you certain this is the same child?" Jake hesitated. In the darkness, he could only make out a small figure moving behind the curtain. "I think so." "You think so?" "Sir, we can't dispatch units based on assumptions." The line went dead. Jake sat in his car, staring at the house. Every instinct screamed at him to do something. But what? Break down the door? Call the fire department and claim there was a gas leak? As he wrestled with his options, the upstairs light went out. Jake drove home feeling like a failure. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. "Mr. Thompson? This is Principal Harrison from Millbrook Elementary." Jake's blood turned cold. "Is Emma okay?" "Emma's fine. But I need you to come in. There's been an incident." 20 minutes later, Jake sat in the principal's office, his heart pounding. Principal Harrison, Linda's sister, looked uncomfortable. "Emma got into a fight yesterday afternoon." "Emma doesn't fight. She punched another student. A boy named Tyler who was making fun of someone named Sarah." Despite everything, Jake felt a surge of pride. His daughter had stood up for someone who couldn't defend herself. According to witnesses, Principal Harrison continued, "Tyler said something about Sarah being a weirdo who probably deserved whatever she got. Emma hit him." Jake winced. "Is she in trouble?" "Under normal circumstances, yes. But given the situation." She paused. "Linda told me about your concerns regarding Sarah. And frankly, several teachers have noticed things too." "What kind of things?" "Sarah's grades dropped dramatically after her mother died. She's lost weight. She flinches when adults approach her. And last month, she fell asleep in class and had what appeared to be a panic attack when she woke up. So why isn't anyone doing anything?" Principal Harrison's expression grew grim. "We tried. But Rick Mitchell has connections. He's donated money to the school district. He knows people on the city council. When we raised concerns, we were told to be more sensitive to his grief." The picture became clearer. Rick Mitchell wasn't just an abuser. He was a connected abuser. The kind who could make problems disappear. "What about Emma?" "She'll serve detention, but that's all. Between you and me, Mr. Thompson, I'm proud of her for standing up for someone else." That afternoon, Jake arrived at the bus stop early again. He needed to see Sarah, to confirm she was alive. But when the bus doors opened, she wasn't there. Emma got off, her face worried. "Dad, Sarah wasn't at school today either." "That's 5 days now." 5 days. A 12-year-old girl had been missing for 5 days, and the system had failed her completely. Jake made his decision. That night, after Emma was asleep, he drove back to the Mitchell house. This time, he didn't just watch. He got out of his car and walked around the property, looking for any way to confirm Sarah's presence. The backyard was fenced, but the gate was unlocked. Jake slipped inside, his heart hammering against his ribs. If someone caught him here, his life would be over. A basement window glowed faintly in the darkness. Jake crept closer and peered inside. What he saw made his blood freeze. Sarah sat on a mattress on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was even thinner than before, her clothes hanging loose on her small frame. Dark bruises covered her arms and legs. But she was alive. Jake pulled out his phone and took photos through the window. The images were grainy, but they clearly showed a child being held in basement-like conditions. As he backed away from the window, his foot caught a garden hose. The metal fitting clanged against a trash can. Upstairs, a light came on. Jake ran. He made it to his car just as the front door opened. Rick Mitchell stepped onto the porch, scanning the street. His gaze lingered on Jake's car for a long moment before he went back inside. Jake drove home with shaking hands, adrenaline coursing through his system. He'd crossed a line tonight, breaking and entering, stalking, trespassing. If Rick called the police, Jake could be arrested. But he had proof now. Photos of Sarah in deplorable conditions. He sent the images to Detective Santos with a message: "She's being held in the basement. This is child imprisonment." The response came an hour later. "These photos were taken illegally. They can't be used as evidence. You need to stop this before you get arrested." Jake stared at his phone in disbelief. A child was being tortured, and the authorities were more concerned about legal technicalities than saving her life. He forwarded the photos to Linda Harrison, Principal Harrison, and the local newspaper. If the system wouldn't help Sarah, maybe public pressure would. The next morning, Jake woke to pounding on his front door. 2 police officers stood on his porch, their expressions grim. "Jake Thompson." "Yes." "You're under arrest for stalking and trespassing." As they read him his rights, Jake's only thought was of Emma. She'd come home from school to find her father gone, just like Sarah had come home to find her mother dead. But maybe someone else would pick up the fight now. The holding cell at Millbrook police station smelled like disinfectant and despair. Jake sat on the narrow bench, staring at the concrete wall, trying not to think about Emma. His sister would take care of her. He'd called her from his one phone call, but Emma would be scared and confused. Just like Sarah. Detective Santos appeared outside his cell at noon. "Congratulations," she said, her voice heavy with sarcasm. "Rick Mitchell's lawyer is pushing for felony stalking charges. You could get 5 years. A child is being abused. A child is supposedly being abused, according to a man who's now been arrested for criminal behavior." Jake stood up, gripping the bars. "Did you see the photos? The photos you took while illegally trespassing on private property? Those photos. She's in a basement, Maria. She's being starved and beaten, and everyone knows it." Detective Santos was quiet for a long moment. Then she stepped closer to the cell. "Off the record," she whispered. "I believe you. But believing and proving are 2 different things. And your actions have made this case infinitely harder to prosecute. So what happens now? Now you pray that Rick Mitchell makes a mistake." Jake was released on bail 6 hours later. His sister, Carol, picked him up with Emma in the car. His daughter's eyes were red from crying. "Daddy, what's happening?" she asked as he climbed into the back seat beside her. "Some people think I did something wrong when I was trying to help Sarah. But helping people isn't wrong." "No, sweetheart. It's not." That evening, Jake's phone rang constantly. The local newspaper had run a story about his arrest, portraying him as either a concerned citizen or a dangerous stalker, depending on who they interviewed. Rick Mitchell's lawyer had issued a statement painting Jake as an unstable single father obsessed with a young girl. Several neighbors came forward to say they'd seen Jake lurking around the bus stop. The narrative was being controlled, and Jake was losing. But then Linda Harrison called. "Jake, you need to know something." After your arrest made the news, 3 other people came forward. "What do you mean?" "A grocery store clerk who's seen Sarah with Rick Mitchell. She says the girl always looks terrified and has visible bruises. A neighbor who's complained about screaming coming from the Mitchell house at night. And a doctor who treated Sarah for a fall down the stairs 2 months ago." Jake's heart raced. "Will they testify?" "They're willing to talk to police. This might be the break we needed." "What about Sarah? Is she still?" "We don't know. Rick Mitchell has lawyered up completely. No one's been able to get near that house." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, staring out at the quiet street. Emma was safe in her bed, protected by locks and alarms and his constant vigilance. But Sarah was still trapped. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. You should have minded your own business. Now you've made things worse for everyone. Jake stared at the message, and something inside him snapped. He'd spent 3 days terrified of Rick Mitchell's threats, worried about his reputation, concerned about legal consequences. But while he'd been afraid, a child had suffered. He typed back, "Where is she?" The response came immediately, "Somewhere you'll never find her." Jake's blood turned to ice. The message could mean Rick had moved Sarah to another location. Or it could mean something much worse. He called Detective Santos, but it went to voicemail. He tried the main police number. "I need to report a threat against a child. Sir, you're going to need to come in and file a formal report. There isn't time. A 12-year-old girl could be in immediate danger. Are you Jake Thompson?" Jake hesitated. His name was now associated with false reports and harassment. "Yes. Sir, you need to stop calling. Any further contact from you will be considered harassment." The line went dead. Jake stood in his kitchen, holding the phone, feeling completely powerless. The system had not only failed Sarah, it was actively preventing him from helping her. He made a decision that would either save Sarah's life or destroy his own. He was going back to the Mitchell house. At midnight, Jake crept through his own backyard and climbed the fence into his neighbor's yard. He moved carefully through the shadows, avoiding streetlights and security cameras. The Mitchell house was dark except for a single light in the basement window, the same window where he'd seen Sarah before. Jake approached carefully, staying low. When he reached the window, he peered inside. The basement was empty. The mattress was gone. No sign that anyone had ever been there. Panic rose in Jake's throat. Had Rick moved Sarah? Had he? A hand grabbed his shoulder. "I thought you might come back." Jake spun around to find Rick Mitchell standing behind him, flanked by 2 other men. All 3 were larger than Jake, and they didn't look friendly. "Where is she?" Jake demanded. Rick smiled, but it was cold and predatory. "Where's who?" "I told the police. Sarah is visiting relatives." "You're lying." "Prove it." One of Rick's companions stepped forward. "Maybe we should teach this pervert a lesson about minding his own business." Jake's mind raced. He was outnumbered, trespassing, and no one knew where he was. If these men decided to hurt him, his body might not be found for days. Emma would be orphaned, just like Sarah. "I called the police before I came here," Jake lied. "They're on their way." Rick's smile faltered slightly. "No, you didn't. If you'd called the police, they would have told you to stay away. You're here because you're obsessed with a little girl, and that makes you sick. I'm here because I'm the only person who seems to care that a child is missing. Sarah isn't missing. She's exactly where she belongs." The words were spoken with such casual cruelty that Jake felt sick. "What did you do to her?" Rick stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Nothing she didn't deserve. Nothing her mother wouldn't have wanted." Jake's control snapped. He lunged forward, but one of Rick's companions caught him, twisting his arm behind his back. Now, Rick said calmly. "Violence won't solve anything, but maybe a little reminder about respecting other people's property will." The man holding Jake twisted his arm harder, sending pain shooting up to his shoulder. Jake bit back a cry, thinking of Emma sleeping safely at home. "Here's what's going to happen," Rick continued. "You're going to go home and forget Sarah Mitchell ever existed. You're going to stop talking to reporters, stop harassing the police, and stop spreading lies about me. Because if you don't..." He pulled out his phone and showed Jake a photo. It was Emma, walking out of Millbrook Elementary, her blonde pigtails catching the sunlight. "She's a pretty little girl," Rick said softly. "Be a shame if something happened to her." Jake's world narrowed to that single image. Every protective instinct he possessed roared to life. "You stay away from my daughter. That's entirely up to you." The man released Jake's arm, and he stumbled forward. Rick and his companions walked away, disappearing into the darkness like shadows. Jake stood alone in the backyard, his entire body shaking. The threat against Emma changed everything. He couldn't risk his daughter's safety, even to save Sarah. But as he walked home, one thought kept echoing in his mind. She's exactly where she belongs. Not she's safe. Not she's with family. Where she belongs. Like property. Like something owned. Jake made it home and double-checked every lock, every window, every security measure he had. Then he sat in Emma's room, watching her sleep until dawn broke through the curtains. The next morning, Linda Harrison called with news that made Jake's blood freeze. The Mitchell house burned down last night. Jake's phone nearly slipped from his hand. What? Electrical fire, according to the preliminary report. The house is completely destroyed. Was anyone? Rick Mitchell is fine. He wasn't home when it started. Says he was out of town on business. Jake's mind raced. What about Sarah? A long pause. There's no sign of her. Rick's maintaining that she's with relatives in another state. But if she was in that basement. Jake, don't even think it. But Jake was thinking it. Had Rick Mitchell burned down his own house to destroy evidence? To hide Sarah's body? Or had the fire been meant to cover up her escape? I need to see the house, Jake said. Absolutely not. Stay away from this, Jake. Please. For Emma's sake. But Jake was already grabbing his car keys. The smell hit him 3 blocks away. Smoke, char, and something else. Something that made his stomach turn. The Mitchell house was a blackened skeleton against the morning sky. Fire trucks and police cars surrounded the property. Yellow tape blocked access to the street. Jake parked as close as he could and approached on foot. Detective Santos spotted him immediately. Go home, Jake. Was anyone in that house? The fire marshal is still investigating. That's not an answer. Detective Santos pulled him aside, away from the other officers. Off the record? They found something in the basement. But until we know what it is. Jake's legs nearly gave out. Oh God. We don't know anything yet. It could be anything. But they both knew what it probably was. Jake drove home in a daze. Emma was at school, safe and unaware that the world had just shifted on its axis. He sat in his empty kitchen, staring at the phone, waiting for news that might destroy what remained of his faith in humanity. The call came at 2 p.m. Jake? It's Maria Santos. Tell me, they found remains in the basement. Definitely human. But Jake held his breath. They're not recent. The forensic team thinks they've been there for months. Maybe longer. Sarah's mother? We don't know yet. But if Sarah was being held in that basement, she would have been living with. The implication was too horrible to voice. A 12-year-old girl, trapped in a basement with her mother's decomposing body. Where's Rick Mitchell? Gone. Vanished. His lawyer says he left town after the fire, but we think he ran. We've issued a bolo, but... Jake closed his eyes. Rick Mitchell was in the wind, and Sarah was still missing. Dead or alive, she was still out there somewhere. Jake? There's something else. What? We found Sarah's backpack in the ashes. And some clothes. Child-sized. The words hit Jake like physical blows. Sarah's backpack. Her clothes. In the ashes of a house fire. But no body? Not yet. The investigation is ongoing. After Detective Santos hung up, Jake sat in his kitchen for a long time, trying to process what he'd learned. Sarah's mother had been murdered and hidden in the basement. Sarah had been living with the body, probably for months. And now Sarah herself might be dead. When Emma came home from school, Jake held her tighter than usual. Dad? You're squishing me. Sorry, sweetheart. Did something happen to Sarah? Jake looked into his daughter's innocent blue eyes and made a choice. Some truths were too dark for a 10-year-old to carry. We're still looking for her. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, watching the street, thinking about a little girl who might be buried in the ashes of a burned house. His phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Unknown number again. She's alive. For now. Jake's heart stopped. He typed back frantically, "Where is she? That depends on you. What do you want?" Meet me tomorrow night. Millbrook Park by the old bridge. Come alone or she dies. Jake stared at the message, his hands shaking. It could be Rick Mitchell. It could be someone else entirely. It could be a trap. But if there was even a chance Sarah was alive, I'll be there. And Jake? If you bring the police, if you tell anyone, I'll know. And Sarah will pay the price. The next day passed in a haze of anxiety and fear. Jake went through the motions, work, lunch, picking up Emma from school. But his mind was on the meeting at Millbrook Park. He'd been to the old bridge before. It was isolated, surrounded by trees, far from any main roads. The perfect place for an ambush, but also the perfect place to exchange a hostage. At dinner, Emma noticed his distraction. Dad, you're not eating. Just thinking, sweetheart. About Sarah? Jake met her eyes. Yeah. About Sarah. I hope she's okay. Me too. That evening, Jake made careful preparations. He left a sealed envelope on his kitchen table, addressed to Detective Santos, explaining where he was going and why. If something happened to him, at least the authorities would know the truth. He also left a letter for Emma, telling her how much he loved her and how proud he was of her bravery in standing up for Sarah. At 10 p.m., Jake drove to Millbrook Park. The parking lot was empty, the playground equipment casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. The old bridge was a quarter-mile walk through the woods. Jake made his way carefully, using his phone's flashlight to navigate the narrow trail. The bridge appeared ahead, a wooden structure spanning a small creek, built decades ago and now showing its age. A figure waited in the center of the bridge. Rick Mitchell stepped into the light, and Jake's heart sank. He'd hoped the messenger was someone else, someone who might actually intend to return Sarah safely. You came, Rick said. I wasn't sure you would. Where is she? Close by. But first, we need to talk. Jake stepped onto the bridge, acutely aware of the water flowing beneath them and the isolation of their surroundings. Talk about what? About how this ends. See, you've caused me a lot of problems, Jake. The police investigation, the newspaper stories, losing my house. That's all because of you. Jake kept his voice steady. That's all because you're a monster who hurts children. Rick's smile was cold. Children need discipline. Sarah's mother understood that. Eventually, you killed her. Janet died in a car accident. Very tragic. But she left Sarah in my care, and I took that responsibility seriously. By locking her in a basement, by teaching her respect, by showing her what happens when little girls don't behave. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at him to attack, to make this man pay for what he'd done. But Sarah's life hung in the balance. Where is she, Rick? Rick pulled out his phone and showed Jake a video. The image was dark and grainy, but Jake could make out a small figure tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned building. She's been asking for you, Rick said. Keep saying Mr. Thompson will come. Mr. Thompson will help me. Touching, really. Jake's throat tightened. What do you want? I want you to disappear. Take your daughter and leave Millbrook. Tonight. Don't come back, don't contact the police, don't try to be a hero anymore. And if I do that, you'll let Sarah go? Rick's laugh was genuinely amused. Oh, Jake, you really don't understand, do you? Sarah knows too much. She's seen too much. She can't be allowed to live. The words hit Jake like ice water. Then what's the point of this meeting? The point is giving you a choice. You can watch her die, or you can walk away and pretend it never happened. Either way, she's not going home. Jake stared at Rick Mitchell, understanding with perfect clarity that he was looking at pure evil. This wasn't about money or revenge or even covering up crimes. This was about a man who enjoyed causing pain. There's a third option, Jake said quietly. Oh? What's that? I stop you right here, right now. Rick's hand moved to his jacket pocket. I wouldn't recommend that. See, I'm not alone. Footsteps echoed from both ends of the bridge. Two men emerged from the darkness, the same ones who'd been with Rick the night before. Jake was trapped. Now then, Rick said pleasantly. Let's discuss your options more seriously. But Jake wasn't listening anymore. His attention was focused on something Rick hadn't noticed, the sound of sirens in the distance, growing closer. Rick heard them too, his expression changing from confidence to confusion to panic. "You called the police." "No," Jake said. "But someone did." The sirens were louder now, and Jake could see flashlights moving through the trees. Rick's companions looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "Boss, we need to go," one of them said. But Rick wasn't ready to give up. He pulled a gun from his jacket pocket, pointing it at Jake's chest. "You've ruined everything," he snarled. "If I can't have my quiet life, then you don't get yours either." Time slowed. Jake saw Rick's finger tighten on the trigger. He thought of Emma, sleeping safely at home. He thought of Sarah, wherever she was, still waiting for someone to save her. And he thought of his own father, the man who taught him that violence was the answer to every problem. Jake had spent his entire adult life trying not to become his father. But sometimes, violence was the only language bullies understood. He lunged forward just as Rick fired. The gunshot echoed across the water, but Jake was already moving. He tackled Rick around the waist, driving them both toward the railing of the bridge. They went over together, falling 15 feet into the shallow creek below. Jake hit the water hard, his shoulder slamming against a rock. Pain shot through his entire body, but he forced himself to move. Rick was thrashing in the water beside him, having lost his gun in the fall. Above them, shouts echoed as police officers swarmed the bridge. Rick's companions were running, but they wouldn't get far. Rick tried to stand, water streaming from his clothes, but Jake grabbed his leg and pulled him down. "Where is she?" Jake demanded, his hands closing around Rick's throat. "Go to hell," Rick gasped. Jake squeezed harder. 25 years of buried rage came pouring out, every beating he'd endured as a child, every nightmare, every moment of helplessness. His father's face blurred with Rick's in the moonlight. "Jake, stop!" Detective Santos's voice cut through the red haze in Jake's mind. She was standing at the edge of the creek, her weapon drawn but not aimed at either of them. "He knows where Sarah is," Jake said, his voice raw. "And he can't tell us if you kill him." Jake looked down at Rick, who was turning blue beneath his hands. It would be so easy to finish it. So satisfying to watch the life drain from this monster's eyes. But that would make him just like his father. Jake released Rick's throat and sat back in the shallow water, breathing hard. Rick coughed and sputtered, rolling onto his side. "You're insane," he wheezed. "Maybe," Jake said. "But I'm not a child killer." Two officers waded into the creek to help them both to shore. Rick was handcuffed immediately, his rights red while he continued to cough up creek water. Detective Santos pulled Jake aside as paramedics checked his injuries. "How did you know to come here?" he asked. "Your daughter called 911. Jake's blood froze. "Emma? How did she?" "She found the letter you left." "Smart kid. She figured out what you were planning and called for help." Guilt washed over Jake. He tried to protect Emma from this nightmare, but she'd been pulled into it anyway. "Is she okay?" "She's with your sister." "Scared, but okay." Jake nodded, then looked at Rick Mitchell, who was being loaded into the back of a police car. Will he talk? He might, now that he's facing kidnapping and attempted murder charges on top of everything else. And if he doesn't, Detective Santos's expression was grim. Then we keep looking. It took 3 days. Rick Mitchell's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, information about Sarah's location in exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty. But Rick had underestimated how much evidence the authorities had gathered. The remains in the basement were confirmed to be Sarah's mother, Janet. Security footage from the pharmacy showed Rick purchasing the materials used to start the house fire. And most damning of all, Rick's phone contained dozens of photos and videos of Sarah in captivity. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Rick finally broke. Sarah was being held in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, barely alive but breathing. Jake wasn't allowed to be there when they found her. He was still technically under investigation for his own actions. But Linda Harrison called him the moment Sarah was safe. "She's asking for you," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. Is she? Alive. Hurt, but alive. She's at the hospital now. Jake drove to Millbrook General with his hands shaking. Emma sat beside him in the passenger seat. She'd refused to stay home, insisting that Sarah would want to see her too. Will she be okay, Dad? Jake looked at his daughter, seeing a maturity in her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. The events had changed them all. I think so, sweetheart. It'll take time, but I think she'll be okay. Sarah was in the pediatric ICU, connected to 4 lines and monitors. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her face pale and hollow. But when Jake and Emma entered the room, her eyes lit up. Mr. Thompson, she whispered. Jake approached the bed carefully, his throat tight with emotion. Hey there, kiddo. You came. Of course I came. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I knew you would. Even when I thought I was going to die, I knew you wouldn't stop looking. Jake had to turn away for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple trust in her voice. Emma stepped forward, her own eyes wet. I brought you something. She pulled out a small stuffed elephant, the same one she slept with every night. His name is Peanut. He helps with nightmares. Sarah accepted the elephant with trembling hands, holding it close to her chest. Thank you, she whispered. Over the following weeks, the full extent of Sarah's ordeal came to light. She'd been held captive for nearly 2 weeks after the house fire, with minimal food and water. The psychological trauma was severe. She suffered from panic attacks, nightmares, and periods of selective mutism. But she was alive. And slowly, carefully, she began to heal. Rick Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His accomplices received lengthy sentences as well. The case made national news, highlighting the failures of the child protective system and the importance of citizen involvement. Jake's charges were dropped, and he was hailed as a hero by some media outlets. But he didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd almost failed when it mattered most. The real test came 3 months later, when Sarah was finally released from the hospital. She had no family left except for a distant aunt in Oregon who'd never met her. The state was preparing to place her in foster care when Jake made an unexpected request. I want to adopt her. Detective Santos looked surprised. Jake, that's a big decision. You'd be taking on a traumatized child with significant needs. I know. And you already have Emma to think about. Emma's the one who suggested it. It was true. Emma had come to him 2 weeks earlier with a proposal that was both heartbreaking and beautiful in its simplicity. Sarah doesn't have a family anymore, she'd said. But we do. We have each other. And we have room for one more. The adoption process was complex and lengthy. Jake had to undergo extensive background checks, psychological evaluations, and home studies. Sarah had to work with therapists to process her trauma and prepare for life in a new family. But 6 months after her rescue, Sarah Mitchell legally became Sarah Thompson. The first night she spent in their home, really their home, not just a temporary placement, Jake tucked both girls into bed. Dad, Sarah said as he turned off her light. Yeah, sweetheart. I used to have nightmares about being invisible. Like no one could see me even when I was screaming for help. Jake's heart clenched. And now I dream about being safe. About having a family who sees me. Jake kissed her forehead gently. Sweet dreams, Sarah. As he closed her door, he found Emma waiting in the hallway. She's going to be okay, isn't she, Dad? Jake pulled his daughter into a hug, marveling at her resilience and compassion. We're all going to be okay. And for the first time in months, Jake believed it was true. 1 year later, Jake stood at the corner of Oak and Fifth, watching the school bus approach. But this time he wasn't alone. Emma and Sarah got off the bus together, chattering about their day. Sarah was still small for her age, still carried traces of her ordeal in the careful way she moved through the world. But she was laughing, actually laughing, at something Emma had said. Dad, Emma called out. Sarah got an A on her English essay. It was about heroes, Sarah added, her cheeks pink with pride. Jake felt his throat tighten. What did you write about? about how heroes aren't always the people you expect. Sometimes they're just regular people who decide to pay attention when everyone else looks away. That evening, the three of them sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Sarah curled up between Jake and Emma, her head resting on Jake's shoulder. "Dad," she said quietly. "Yeah. Thank you for seeing me." Jake wrapped his arms around both his daughters, holding them close. "Thank you for letting me." In the distance, another school bus rounded the corner, carrying other children home to their families. Jake watched it pass and said a silent prayer for all the kids who might be crying in silence, waiting for someone to notice. Because sometimes, being a hero was as simple as paying attention to a child who needed to be seen. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. It takes just 2 seconds, but it makes my day. Thanks for watching.